Jacob's family moves to Egypt. The impossible news had reached Jacob. His son Joseph was alive and ruling over all Egypt. After 22 years of mourning, Jacob's heart had been revived with hope and joy. Now the aged patriarch faced a monumental decision: to leave the land of promise and travel to Egypt to see his beloved son one last time. This is the story of a family's journey to a foreign land and God's reassurance that he would be with them every step of the way. So Israel set out with all that was his. The decision had been made. Jacob would go to Egypt to see Joseph. He gathered his household, his possessions, his flocks and herds, and began the journey southward. When he reached Beersheba, Jacob stopped. This place held special significance for him and his family. Beersheba was where his father Isaac had lived, where his grandfather Abraham had made a covenant and planted a tamarisk tree. It was a place associated with God's presence and promises to his family. At Beersheba, Israel offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. It was an act of worship, of seeking God's blessing and guidance before taking this major step. Jacob was leaving Canaan, the land God had promised to Abraham and his descendants. Even though he was going to see Joseph, even though there was famine in Canaan, leaving the promised land was not a small matter. That night, God spoke to Israel in a vision. "Jacob, Jacob," God called. "Here I am," Jacob replied, just as his grandfather Abraham had replied when God called to him. And God said, "I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there." God knew Jacob's heart. He knew the questions and fears that might be troubling the old man. Was it right to leave the land of promise? What would become of God's promises if the family settled in Egypt? God reassured Jacob directly, "Don't be afraid." This move to Egypt was part of God's plan. In Egypt, Jacob's family would grow into a great nation. "I will go down to Egypt with you," God continued, "and I will surely bring you back again, and Joseph's own hand will close your eyes." It was a tender promise. God would be with Jacob in Egypt. The family would eventually return to Canaan, not in Jacob's lifetime, but they would return. And God promised Jacob something deeply personal. Joseph would be with him when he died. After all these years of separation, Jacob would have his beloved son by his side at the end of his life. With this divine reassurance, Jacob's heart was at peace. God had blessed this journey. He could go to Egypt knowing that God would be with him and that God's purposes would prevail. Then Jacob left Beersheba, and Israel's sons took their father Jacob and their children and their wives in the carts that Pharaoh had sent to transport them. The carts that Joseph had provided made the journey possible for the elderly Jacob and for the women and children. They also took with them their livestock and the possessions they had acquired in Canaan. So Jacob and all his offspring went to Egypt. He took with him to Egypt his sons and grandsons and his daughters and granddaughters, all his offspring. The text then provides a detailed list of the names of the Israelites who went to Egypt, Jacob and his descendants. It was important to record who made this journey, for these were the people who would become the nation of Israel. The list begins with Jacob's sons through Leah, Reuben the firstborn, then Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. Each son had his own sons who came with him. Reuben had 4 sons. Simeon had 6. Levi had 3 sons. Gershon, Kohath, and Merari, names that would become important in Israel's history. Judah came with his sons, though two of his sons, Er and Onan, had already died in Canaan. The sons who traveled with him would continue Judah's line, the line from which King David and eventually the Messiah would come. The sons of Leah also included Dinah, Jacob's daughter. Including Jacob himself, the descendants of Leah numbered 33 persons. Then there were the descendants of Zilpah, the servant Laban had given to his daughter Leah. Through Zilpah, Jacob had Gad and Asher, and they brought their children and grandchildren, 16 persons in all. The sons of Rachel, Jacob's beloved wife, were Joseph and Benjamin. Joseph was already in Egypt, of course, and had two sons born to him there, Manasseh and Ephraim, born to him by Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. Benjamin had 10 sons who made the journey with him. In all, the descendants of Rachel numbered 14. Finally, there were the descendants of Bilhah, the servant given to Rachel. Through Bilhah, Jacob had Dan and Naphtali, and they brought their children, 7 persons in all. All those who went to Egypt with Jacob, those who were his direct descendants, not counting his sons' wives, numbered 66 persons. With the 2 sons who had been born to Joseph in Egypt, the members of Jacob's family which went to Egypt were 70 in all. 70 people. It wasn't a large number by the standards of nations, but it was the beginning of something great. These 70 people would grow, over the coming centuries, into a vast multitude. Now Jacob sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to get directions to Goshen. It was Judah whom Jacob sent, the same Judah who had suggested selling Joseph all those years ago, the same Judah who had offered himself as a slave in Benjamin's place. Judah had become someone Jacob trusted for important tasks. When they arrived in the region of Goshen, Joseph had his chariot made ready and went to Goshen to meet his father Israel. The moment Joseph had been dreaming of had finally arrived. He was going to see his father again. As soon as Joseph appeared before him, he threw his arms around his father and wept for a long time. Can you imagine that reunion? 22 years since they had last seen each other. Jacob had thought Joseph was dead. Joseph had endured slavery and prison, and now they were together again, embracing, weeping tears of joy and relief. Israel said to Joseph, "Now I am ready to die, since I have seen for myself that you are still alive." For Jacob, this was enough. He had lived with grief and loss for so many years, believing his beloved son was gone forever. Now he had seen Joseph with his own eyes, had held him in his arms. Whether he lived one more day or many more years, Jacob was at peace. His deepest wish had been fulfilled. But Joseph had practical matters to attend to. His family had arrived in Egypt, and they needed to settle in properly. He needed to present them to Pharaoh and secure their place in the land. Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, "I will go up and speak to Pharaoh and will say to him, 'My brothers and my father's household, who were living in the land of Canaan, have come to me. The men are shepherds. They tend livestock, and they have brought along their flocks and herds and everything they own.'" Then Joseph gave them important advice. "When Pharaoh calls you in and asks, 'What is your occupation?' you should answer, 'Your servants have tended livestock from our boyhood on, just as our fathers did.' Then you will be allowed to settle in the region of Goshen, for all shepherds are detestable to the Egyptians." This was strategic counsel. Egyptians looked down on shepherds. They considered shepherding a lowly occupation. But Joseph saw this cultural prejudice as an advantage. If Pharaoh knew they were shepherds, he would be happy to settle them in Goshen, away from the main Egyptian population centers. This would give Joseph's family their own space, their own territory, where they could maintain their identity and way of life. Joseph went in and told Pharaoh, "My father and brothers, with their flocks and herds and everything they own, have come from the land of Canaan and are now in Goshen." He chose 5 of his brothers and presented them to Pharaoh. Just as Joseph had predicted, Pharaoh asked them, "What is your occupation?" "Your servants are shepherds," they replied to Pharaoh. "Just as our fathers were," they continued. "We have come to live here for a while, because the famine is severe in Canaan and your servants' flocks have no pasture. So now, please let your servants settle in Goshen." They were honest and direct, explaining their situation and making their request clearly. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Your father and your brothers have come to you, and the land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best part of the land. Let them live in Goshen. And if you know of any among them with special ability, put them in charge of my own livestock." Pharaoh was generous, just as he had been before. The best part of the land was available to Joseph's family. And if any of them were particularly skilled shepherds, they could even work for Pharaoh himself. It was a warm welcome, a reflection of Pharaoh's trust in and affection for Joseph. Then Joseph brought his father Jacob in and presented him to Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. It was a remarkable moment. Jacob, the wandering shepherd, the man who had lived by faith in God's promises, stood before the most powerful ruler on earth and blessed him. The greater does not bless the lesser. It's always the other way around. In this simple act, Jacob demonstrated that he served a God greater than Pharaoh, greater than Egypt. Pharaoh asked Jacob, "How old are you?" And Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The years of my pilgrimage are 130. My years have been few and difficult, and they do not equal the years of the pilgrimage of my fathers." Jacob called his life a pilgrimage, a journey, a temporary sojourn. Even at 130 years old, even after all he had experienced, Jacob saw himself as a traveler, not someone who had arrived at a final destination. His fathers, Abraham and Isaac, had lived even longer, and they too had been pilgrims in the land of promise. Jacob's description of his years as few and difficult might seem strange. 130 years is a long life, but Jacob was comparing himself to his ancestors, and he was being honest about the hardships he had faced. The conflict with Esau, the deception by Laban, the loss of Rachel, the years of grieving for Joseph, and so many other trials. Then Jacob blessed Pharaoh again and left his presence. The double blessing at the beginning and end of the audience emphasized Jacob's role as one who carried God's blessing to others. So Joseph settled his father and his brothers in Egypt and gave them property in the best part of the land, the district of Ramesses, as Pharaoh directed. Joseph also provided his father and his brothers and all his father's household with food, according to the number of their children. The family was established in Egypt. They had land, provisions, and Joseph's protection. The famine that had threatened to destroy them had instead become the means of their salvation and their journey to a place where they would be cared for and would grow. There was no food, however, in the whole region because the famine was severe. Both Egypt and Canaan wasted away because of the famine. But Egypt had food because of Joseph's wise planning. He continued his work managing the famine relief, collecting payment for the grain, and eventually helping Pharaoh acquire land throughout Egypt as people sold their property to buy food. Joseph said to the people, "Now that I have bought you and your land today for Pharaoh, here is seed for you so you can plant the ground. But when the crop comes in, give a fifth of it to Pharaoh. The other 4/5 you may keep as seed for the fields and as food for yourselves and your households and your children." It was a fair system. The people could keep 80% of their harvest, giving only 20% to Pharaoh. "You have saved our lives," they said. "May we find favor in the eyes of our Lord. We will be in bondage to Pharaoh." So Joseph established it as a law concerning land in Egypt, still in force in the writer's day, that a fifth of the produce belongs to Pharaoh. It was only Pharaoh's land that did not become his. Meanwhile, the Israelites settled in Egypt in the region of Goshen. They acquired property there and were fruitful and increased greatly in number. This was the beginning of God's promise being fulfilled. "I will make you into a great nation there," God had told Jacob. And now, in Egypt, in the land of Goshen, the family began to grow. They had space, security, and provision. Generation after generation would be born there, and the 70 people who entered Egypt would multiply into hundreds of thousands. Jacob lived in Egypt 17 years, and the years of his life were 147. He had 17 precious years with Joseph, the same number of years he had enjoyed with Joseph before the brothers had sold him. It was as if God was giving back what had been lost, redeeming the years of sorrow with years of joy. For 17 years, Jacob lived in peace, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, watching his family grow, knowing that Joseph was alive and well. After a life of struggle and pilgrimage, Jacob's final years were marked by rest and reunion. The journey to Egypt had been worth it. The family that had been scattered by jealousy and sin had been brought together by God's providence. The son who had been lost was found. The promises God had made were still true and were being fulfilled in unexpected ways. Jacob's pilgrimage wasn't over yet. He would face death soon enough, but he faced it with peace, knowing he had seen God's faithfulness, knowing his family was secure, and knowing that God's promises would continue beyond his lifetime. The 70 people who came to Egypt didn't know they would be there for 400 years. They didn't know their descendants would become slaves, would cry out to God for deliverance, would be rescued by mighty signs and wonders. They didn't know the full story, but God knew, and God was faithful. The same God who had called Abraham, who had blessed Isaac, who had renamed Jacob as Israel, who had preserved Joseph and elevated him to power. This God would continue to work out his purposes through this family. They were in Egypt now, but Egypt was not their final home. They were pilgrims, just as Jacob said, and God would bring them back to the land of promise at just the right time.